Chances are you're familiar with the workflow of adding in an HDR or adding in a sky texture, but this doesn't make things look very interesting, and you might find that you're going for some specific mood with your scene, and you're just not capturing that with the current way you're doing lighting. So you can see here I have an HDR lighting set up, and I also have a bunch of area lights and a bunch of point lights. Now you might be wondering, okay, what are these area lights and point lights for? It's to give more emphasis to specific areas. I kind of talked about this previously, but a lot of the time what happens when the sun is coming through some trees, for example, is that you'll have like some areas that are more shadowed and then other areas where, that are just indirect sunlight. So I'm sort of faking that using these area lights because it's much quicker to do something like this than to actually set up the trees and then boost the lighting or something. Plus, this actually gives you more control as an artist because you might want some areas to be lit up for some specific reason. But just this idea that like area lights and point lights should only be used where they make sense is kind of wrong, and because you're ultimately kind of hacking the system to get a specific look. So if I go Shift A here and then go to this light drop down, there are 4 different options here, and each of them do various different things. So just a rundown of the different types of lights in Blender. You have point lights, which will kind of go radially. So like within a certain area around it, it will be emitting light. Then you have spotlights, which will be emitting light on a specific area in a circular pattern. Can technically be similar to an area light, but a little bit different. I'll get to that. Then we have sunlights, which will just cast light on everything within a certain direction. And we have area lights, which will be emitting light to a certain direction, but will also have its own shape as a light source. A spotlight is always going to have the cone shape when it comes to how it's kind of emitting its light. I'm going to start with point lights, and I'm just going to increase the wattage. Now this is looking a little warm here for nighttime because the way our eye kind of sees things at nighttime is more bluish, so we can change the color a little bit here. So maybe around 0.2, 0.3, and then we can press Alt-D while selecting it, and then I like to press Shift-Z after doing that. And then you can drag the mouse around to move this other light around. So this is like a duplicate of this other light, but it just has all of the stuff copied. So, and also if I adjust this, then both of them will actually be adjusted. If you don't want that, like you want this to be independent from this other one, you can go to Object, Relations, Make Single User Object and Data. And so I don't want them to be like right next to each other because that's just going to create like a bunch of light kind of in this area. Like I said before, I want some areas to be kind of more lit than others. So maybe, yeah, you really want to tweak the wattage to get something that looks good. And I'm also going to turn off multiple importance in this case because it can kind of get in the way when you're doing stuff with glass. Now, the rest of the lighting, aside from the greenhouse itself, is fairly straightforward because from here you can just use the same strategy that we used in here, like just duplicating these same lights around. So now we can move on to the inside of the greenhouse because we have this glass here, right? So we'll be able to see through it. Now inside of here, I have some of these lamps, and what I'm going to do first is put some spotlights there. Just inside these lamps here, and I'm going to check. Okay, definitely need more wattage than that. This blend here is pretty useful, kind of increase like the angle that this is coming out. So I'm actually going to go with a warmer temperature for these spotlights because, like, from outside looking inside the building, that's often what I find looks more interesting. So I'm going to change this to that 3500 maybe, and I can increase this wattage. Okay, I definitely need to add more lights, so add a point light. Maybe I'll just reduce the overall exposure because it's looking a bit too bright. Maybe 0.4 or so. I forgot to change the radius on the spotlights, so about 0.05 should be fine because you don't want it too big, otherwise it's going to be, you know, bigger than the lamp. Now, point lights that are kind of closer to the ground are going to be more visible from outside. Like, for example, here, you can very clearly see this point light, but you can't really see the spotlights that well. So, around 3500. So I think that looks good for now. Another thing that you might want to have is like these highlights on these specific edges of an object. This shows up sometimes with how the reflection is sort of doing its thing. The rendering engine, from my experience, doesn't really do this that well. The way I'm going to do that is by just adding some point lights. Yeah, so see how it's creating that, and this kind of depends on the roughness of the material. Like, changing the roughness of the material will change how this light kind of looks. So now we get that edge there, and basically just kind of duplicating that, but making sure not to, like, because right now it kind of looks weird because, like, we have this light here, but then it's dark here, and then it's light here again. Adjust the radius accordingly and adjust the location of the light accordingly. I think that's shaping up pretty well. So I'm going to boost the wattage a little bit, maybe about 250 on the exterior point lights. So now we end up with something that looks like this. From here you can do things like adding glare, and what I mentioned in a previous video, if you mix this output with the original, and yeah, so I'm going to Control-Shift-click on that. You can boost the glare, and I'm not going to use streaks, I'm going to use fog glow. You can boost the glare. We can actually see it. Okay, it's actually pretty subtle. That's because our threshold is too high. If I knock that down to about 0.2, the interior lights that I've set up aren't that well set up. You could tweak this and continue with the setup to make it look better. All right, thank you for watching.